Carving demonstration. Permanent mandibular left canine. 1.5-inch wax block is used for carving this tooth. From one end of the wax block, measure 11 mm using the metal scale and mark it using the wax carver, and then draw lines parallel to the edge of the block on all the four surfaces exactly at the same measurement. This line corresponds to the cervical line of the tooth. This 11 mm part of the wax block is used for carving the crown, and the remaining part is used for carving the root. After demarcating the crown and the root, the individual surfaces are labelled on the root part of the wax block. This is the labial view, mesial view, lingual view, and the distal view. For carving the labial and the lingual surface, draw the labial and the lingual outlines of the crown on the mesial side of the crown part. Similarly, draw the labial and the lingual outlines on the distal side. The labial outline should be convex in the middle and also in the cervical third, and it should be flat in the incisal third level. The lingual outline should be convex in the cervical third, which denotes the cingulum, and concave in the middle and the incisal third, denoting the fossa. That is, it should have an S-shaped outline. Now the labial surface is carved by slowly removing the wax on the labial aspect in the middle and the incisal third, and thereby creating a smooth flat labial surface. Now, following the labial outline drawn on the proximal sides, the labial convexity in the cervical third is created by removing wax near the cervical line. When carving the labial surface, it should be noted that the labial surface should be lingually inclined. Then, the lingual surface is carved. This is done by removing wax on the lingual aspect in the middle and the incisal third levels. The wax in this area should be removed more to create a concavity in the middle and the incisal third, which will correspond to the lingual fossa. Now, by following the lingual outline drawn on the proximal sides, the lingual convexity in the cervical third is created by removing the wax near the cervical line. This lingual convexity corresponds to the cingulum and should be smoothened and made prominent by deepening the concavity in the middle and the incisal third levels. This is the distal aspect showing the carved labial and lingual outlines of the crown. Next, draw the proximal outlines on the labial and the lingual aspect of the crown. On the labial surface, draw the proximal outline starting from the mesio-incisal and the disto-incisal edge up to the cervical line to about 0.5 mm short of the edge of the block. Similarly, on the lingual surface, draw the proximal outline starting from the mesio-incisal and the disto-incisal edge up to the cervical line to about 1 mm short of the edge of the block. This 0.5 mm difference between the labial and the lingual surface corresponds to the lingual convergence of the crown. This is the labial and the lingual aspect showing the proximal outlines. Now, carve the proximal aspect by slowly removing the wax on the mesial surface starting from the mesio-labial edge and moving towards the mesio-lingual edge. Next, the distal surface is carved by slowly removing the wax starting from the disto-labial edge and moving towards the disto-lingual edge. The carving of this proximal aspect is otherwise called as the proximal reduction, and this should follow the mesial and distal outlines drawn on the labial and the lingual aspect. This is the carved proximal surfaces. Now, draw a line in the center of the crown on the labial surface extending from the marked cervical area up to the incisal aspect. Then, draw two lines extending onto the mesial and distal sides like a heart on the incisal surface. The line on the labial surface corresponds to the canine ridge, and it should not be straight but should be slightly convex with the convexity facing towards the mesial side. Now, the canine ridge is carved by removing the wax on the mesio-labial surface starting from the canine ridge line up to the mesial side in a slanting manner. Similarly, the wax is carved on the disto-labial surface starting from the canine ridge line up to the distal side. This shows the carved canine ridge. To carve the mesial and the distal cuspal slopes, two lines are drawn on the incisal third of the labial surface extending from a point midway mesio-distally and ending up to the mesial and the distal outlines at the junction of incisal and middle thirds. The cuspal slopes should be in such a way that the mesial slope should be short and the distal slope should be long. Now the cuspal slopes are carved by removing the wax near the incisal third by following the cuspal outlines. This shows the carved canine cusp, cuspal slopes and the canine ridge. From the edge of the wax block, measure 27 mm using the metal scale and mark it using the wax carver. And then draw lines on all the four surfaces exactly at the same measurement. This line corresponds to the apex of the tooth. This is the labial aspect showing the marked measurement of the tooth. Now remove the excess wax exactly at the marked end, which corresponds to the apex. Next, draw the mesial and the distal outlines of the root on the labial aspect of the root part. Similarly, the mesial and the distal outlines of the root is drawn on the lingual aspect of the root part. But this outline should be 0.5 mm less than the labial aspect. This 0.5 mm difference corresponds to the lingual convergence of the root. This is the labial and the lingual aspects showing the proximal root outline. Then the proximal surface of the root is carved by slowly removing the wax from the cervical line up to the apical end. This is how a completed proximal root outline should be on one side. Next, the other proximal surface of the root is carved in a similar way by slowly removing the wax from the cervical line up to the apical end. While carving the proximal outlines of the root, the carving should follow the outlines drawn previously on the labial and the lingual aspects. This is the labial showing the carved proximal outlines of the root. Next, draw the labial and the lingual outline of the root on the mesial aspect of the root part. Similarly, the labial and the lingual outline of the root is drawn on the distal aspect. This shows the mesial and the distal aspects showing the labial and the lingual outlines of the root. Now, the labial surface of the root is carved by slowly removing the wax from the cervical line up to the apical end. Then, the lingual surface of the root is also carved in a similar way by slowly removing the wax from the cervical line up to the apical end. This is the mesial showing the carved labial and the lingual outlines of the root. Now the cervical line is drawn on the labial, distal, lingual, and the mesial aspect. This is how the cervical line should be drawn on all the different aspects of the tooth. The cervical construction is then carved by slowly removing the wax from the crown towards the marked cervical line. This is done on all the surfaces of the carved tooth. This is the labial, mesial, lingual and distal aspects showing the partly carved cervical construction. Next, the cervical construction is carved by slowly removing the wax from the root towards the marked cervical line. This is also done on all the surfaces of the carved tooth. After carving the cervical construction, the root part should be smoothened to remove any excess elevations. Now, the distal curvature of the root is carved in the apical third by removing the wax in the apical third, thereby creating a concavity. Then the root apex is rounded on all the sides. Next, in the lingual surface of the carved crown part of the tooth, draw the outlines of the cingulum, lingual ridge, marginal ridges and the palatal fossae. This shows the lingual outline of the palatal surface of the crown. Now the lingual fossae are carved by slowly removing the wax from the fossae area. After carving the fossae, the lingual ridge, marginal ridges and the cingulum are rounded so that it merges with the fossae. By using the scooped end of the wax carver, the lingual fossae is carved accurately below the cingulum area. This shows the completed lingual aspect. Preliminary polishing is done using the rough polishing cloth by rubbing gently on all the surfaces of the carved tooth. Then, the yellow polishing cloth is used for polishing by rubbing gently on all the surfaces of the carved tooth. While using these polishing cloths, forceful rubbing should be avoided to prevent any changes in the contour of the carved tooth. Final polishing is done using either a cotton or a tissue paper dipped in soap water. After polishing in the soap water, the carved tooth is dried using a tissue paper. This is the final labial aspect, mesial aspect, lingual aspect, distal aspect, and incisal aspect of permanent mandibular left canine. This shows the different stages of tooth carving up to the completed tooth.